Okay. All right, welcome everyone. Beautiful. So welcome. Thank you for coming to our third Z Civic conversation. My name is Jordan Battle. I'm the Patron and Community Engagement Manager at Z Space. Tonight, we'll be having an open conversation about dance with members of the Bay Area dance community. First, I want to start this evening with our land acknowledgement. Z Space holds itself accountable to the work of undoing oppression and advancing equity to overcome our country's bitter history of segregation and racial inequality. As part of that work, we must start by acknowledging that Z Space resides on the ancestral and unceded land of San Francisco, the traditional land site of the Ramaytush Ohlone tribe. Since we are meeting virtually, we recognize that we are all on different unceded lands, and we pay respect to the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting, and we recognize those Native communities and extend our deepest gratitude to those who have stewarded this land and offer our respect to their elders, past, present, and future. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that native land link in the chat and ask folks to let us know where you're currently zooming in from. And with that, I'm going to pass to our moderator for this evening, Miss Amy Marie.
Hi. Thank you, Jordan, so much. Thank you all for joining me this evening and having this conversation. I am Amy Marie. I'm a plus size dancer and a plus size model, and I have had dance in my life in some kind of way for many, many years, over 27, 28 years. My history with dance has always been in and around my size. And so a lot of my work now that I do kind of likes to bend the kind of norms and the ideas of what a dancer looks like. And I really try and fight for inclusivity and accessibility for all different sizes and ages and races. That's really important to me, feeling that I have been left out in many opportunities in ballet and contemporary and jazz because your girl got some extra jiggle and some junk in the trunk. So I really wanted to have this conversation, not to just talk about that, but to meet other people that are doing work and have goals and aspirations for the dance community with their company or with their individual work. And I have a lot of really great people here. If you would like to go in order that Jordan has put you in the order to introduce yourself and where you're coming from, maybe a brief introduction of your history with dance, I am sure we would all love to hear that.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is David Herrera. I'm also coming to you from traditional Ramaytush Ohlone territory, San Francisco, California. I am the artistic director of David Herrera Performance Company, and we were officially founded in 2007. So we're celebrating our 14th year this year, obviously moving into our quinceañera next year. My organization really is focused on centering intersectional Latinx and Hispanic experiences in our work and our concepts, and then with our programming outside of the dance performances that we put on and tour. We also have a mentorship program called Latin Extensions for emerging intersectional Latinx and Hispanic artists with under 5 years of professional experience. And we also launched Latinx Hispanic Dancers United, which is a national initiative that now has 35 members here in the San Francisco Bay Area and over 40 members nationally. And that is growing to, that's a pipeline and a caucus and a community so that we can unify our voices collectively and get a little bit more power on the national dance field. Just a quick brief history about myself. I got into dance very late in life, later than most people that I know. I was about to turn 20 when I really got into the idea of what many of us consider professional dance. With that said, I'm going to take a step back because I want to point out that dance was already in my life, movement and dance was already in my life as a person of color with a lot of rich culture. And it was found in a lot of the events that my family and my community partook in. But it was it was the training and the studio that I started to do when I was 19 in college, as opposed to training in studios when I was a young kid. So I wanted to uplift that because I am now working a lot on getting rid of these notions of what is professional versus what is not, what is considered something worth putting on stage and charging for, or so on and so forth. And I also want to have you all consider how has dance and movement been alive in your lives prior to any formalized training. And I'll pass this on. Oh, excuse me, sorry, one more thing. Pronouns, my pronouns are he, him.
Hello, everyone. I'm Raven Malouf-Renning, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am a metagender, non-binary person. And dance-wise, I work very closely with Amy and Eric Kupers in Dandelion Dancetheater. I'm one of the assistant directors of the Walks Between Wandering Ensemble. I'll let Eric talk a little bit more about that when it's his turn to introduce. In addition to that, I am a lead artist at Safe House for the Performing Arts. I do a lot of I make work, and I also am part of the co-op that we just formed, helping to steer the leadership of the space in a new direction. And I'm also starting to curate things in the space. Very passionate about providing a platform for people who don't necessarily get the platform in mainstream spaces. And since I live at several intersections, I am plus size myself. That's one thing that Amy and I connected on early on. I'm also queer and gender nonconforming. And the space that we occupy at Safe House is part of the transgender cultural district, and we recently got a grant to do some programming along that area, so I'll be doing some talking there. A lot of the way I approach dance, it's been a little bit of a journey. I started off in ballet, like many folks did. I grew to love modern dance in college. I had kind of a detour into the healing arts for a while, but then I came back to my love of dance. But it's all informed where I am now. And as we are in this precarious place in the world, one of the things that I really want dance to reflect is, a snapshot of where we are now, who we are in this moment, and allowing that to be real. And if that means that it's raw and it's real, it doesn't have to be polished. And we can change the conversation of what dance looks like through there. And did I say I'm on Ramaytush Ohlone land in San Francisco? I can't remember if I did, but I just put that in there. And I'm going to pass it on to the next person.
Hey y'all, Jes Deville here. My pronouns are they, them. And I'm so pleased to be a part of this chat today. A bit about me. My focus is on dance media, scenic design, and weaving education and entertainment experiences through those mediums. Primarily, I'm a choreographer, and I guess you would call me a creative producer. By day, I'm the managing director of Epiphany Dance Theater. So much of my work is done site-specifically. And I also founded my own company in 2017 called Openhaus Athletics, where there's a deep focus on rewriting the narratives that we all have as historically marginalized communities to the land and how that affects us socially. So I believe I said, maybe not, my pronouns are they, them. I identify as a queer, non-binary Afro-Latinx human. And so through that, I feel like much of my work has to do with the ways that we've been socialized to, or not to, take up space in the world. And so I really appreciate what you mentioned earlier, David, about dance being inherently woven into the cultural experience for us. And I can definitely resonate with that. And so between that and training from an early age with beautiful choreographers like Stanley Love and Edissa Weeks and Safi Thomas with the Hip Hop Dance Conservatory in New York, I've really been trying to weave and meld all of these different modalities that I've come across. So looking forward to chatting with you all. Thanks so much.
Hello, everybody. My name's Eric Kupers, and I am on Chochenyo Ohlone land, AKA Oakland, California. And my people are Ashkenazi Jews coming from mostly the Ukraine, Russia, and other parts of Eastern Europe about 100 years ago to this land. And then my people are also what I call walks between, and that's a term I learned from a mentor, Elias Raymer, and walks between. Originally, he sort of developed this mythology around being gay and being a gay man and called it being a walks between person. And then in my work with him, I said, well, all that you're writing about walks between people feels much more expansive than just gay men. And it feels like it's artists and outcasts and weirdos and anyone who doesn't fit in. And so it's a kind of another way of saying queer, perhaps, but a less defined way of saying queer, maybe. And queer is pretty undefined already. I'm in transition. I'm always in transition, but I feel especially in transition right now. I turn 50 next month, and my company that I co-direct with Kimiko Guthrie, Dandelion Dancetheater, turns 25 this fall. So it feels like this moment of shifting things. I'm also, I should say, I'm a professor of dance and inclusive performance at Cal State East Bay and the chair of our department. In recent conversations about the work that I do, in the past, I've identified as a choreographer, director, dance artist, who makes performance that is inclusive and aims to be like ceremony or ritual. And that the transition I think I'm going through it, as much as I can tell right now, is that I think I'm identifying more as someone who makes ceremony and ritual that uses things like dance and music and theater. And it's a subtle distinction, but a very powerful one to me at this moment. And so I'm interested in this conversation to sort of see like where are we around this dance idea of a dance community or a dance field? Because for me, it's I don't know what it is at this point, and that's exciting. So that's me.
Thank you very much. It's so interesting to meet so many of you virtually and to hear there's a wide variety of different pots and pans that we have, a little of this, a little of that. I wanted to have this conversation. Jordan and I talked about dance and where it is now and where it could be in the future. And one of the nice things about seeing all of your social media links is that I'm able to go and stalk you all and see what kind of work you're making and creating and sending out into the world. And so for the time that we're in now, dance is really kind of at this interesting cusp, especially with COVID going on right now, because some of us have not been able to perform in person and see shows as much, but we've been able to watch other performers and other companies from afar. So we can go in the same order, or you can chime in organically, however you feel. But I would like to just have a quick conversation, a quick check-in with how COVID has affected you and either your personal relationship with dance. For example, have you taken a break from dance? Have you used it as a creative something to push you forward with your creative journey? Have you been able to meet with your company members? Have you taken time off? Or how did that work for you with your dance journey in your dance realm? I think, I forget who went first. Was it Raven? No, it wasn't Raven. It was David.
Sure, I can start this conversation off.
Mhm.
So
Sure.
COVID for me was, I think COVID has actually been a time of growth for me. And I mean that not just company-wise, but I also mean for me as an individual and as an artist. And I recognize that that's a very privileged thing to say. So I wanna point that out. But as far as the company, like everybody else, I feared that we canceled everything. Everything went away, so to speak. But I thought to myself, well, what can I do in this time then if I'm not in the studio creating? And because as choreographers and artistic directors, or I should say, for myself, I put a lot of my identity on that. And so I thought, well, what else can I be doing during this time? One of them was I jumped even deeper into grant writing, which has paid off. We recently received a San Francisco Arts Commission grant and a California Arts Council grant in the last two or 3 weeks, one back to back, all for the programming that we're doing to uplift Latinx, intersectional Latinx and Hispanic voices. So that was something that I probably wrote more grants in the last year than I did in the last 3 years combined. So
Yes, congratulations. Just really quickly, I want to throw that out and give you your flowers really quickly. Sorry.
Thanks. I figured this is a way to utilize this time. The other way I utilized this time was I continued the community programming online. So that was something that was that could easily shift online. So all our meetings have been online and it has been developing and growing. And I've also threw myself into being a panelist for other grants. So, I was recently a panelist for the city of Berkeley. I was recently also for Mid-Atlantic Arts. I put in my name for other things. And so that was another way for me to contribute to the community and to also to try to bring about some of the changes that I'm looking for within the community. I thought, well, if I'm asking for this, then maybe I should put myself there. I should be one of these voices that speaks up and speaks loudly. So I have seen my company. We rehearsed actually outside in a park once a week, just so that we can keep our creative juices kind of flowing. And right now we are scheduled to return to an official rehearsal season in 2 weeks. So so long as we don't get shut down again, we are back in full season with actually a performance at C Space called The Tip of My Tongue. So yeah, and I can speak about that a little bit later, the show that we're doing at C Space. But that's in a nutshell what I've been doing during this time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, both individually and collectively with the company. That's good to hear. Who would like to speak? Raven, were you next? Or I'll just randomly call. Raven, would you like to throw out how it's been for you?
Sure. It's been a surprisingly productive period in a different way. After being in the studio so much, before the pandemic, it was kind of a very abrupt shifting of gears. And, at first with the inclusive ensemble, figuring out how to make performance work online and figure out what what happened there. That was a bit of an exploration. With Safe House, what we wound up doing was having monthly or every other month digital showcases. And so not only did I make films for those showcases, along with Jesse Bai and a few others, co-hosted these showcases and curated them and helped make them go, so that we were able to keep our artists creating work and keep putting ourselves out there, so that that we didn't die. At the same time, you know, we've also used the time to envision what we want the organization to look like as it's coming out. You know, on the ensemble side, you know, we've been rehearsing in a hybrid type of thing, online once a week and in person also once a week. In December, COVID actually touched me literally. In a very personal way. I came down with the illness, and that took my participation to be entirely virtual for about 5-6 months. And so I found myself in isolation, still figuring out how to stay connected and still make work, and relearn how my lungs worked, how my ribs moved, and just really coming into clear focus, my body's limitations, and working with them as my recovery progressed. It took me a full 7 months to recover. But then, you know, it was a blessing to be able to get back to rehearsing in person. We reopened our doors at Safe House last week, and it was a beautiful thing. I mean, everyone was masked. We had protocols checked at the door. And this weekend, we're going to be hosting a touring company. I'll tell you more about that later. I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you. Thank you for that check-in and that update. I knew a little bit of that story, what your relationship with dance has been throughout with COVID. So thank you for sharing that with all the rest of us. Jes, did you want to chime in and share your experience with dance and COVID personally and professionally, and how it's been working for you?
Sure, yeah. I think that, you know, when you're a dance maker, when you're a producer, you end up wearing so many hats anyway, right? You learn how to do your admin and your costuming and your graphic design. And David mentioned like grant writing, all the things. And I really felt like COVID was also very productive for me in that way. It almost allowed me to get a little bit more serious about my personal practice. Whereas previously I was, you know, taking a lot of gigs, working for other entities. So there was kind of an unfolding that happened where I dove into my movement vocabulary and how I related to the outdoors, because that was the only way to safely practice. We didn't have any studio space. I have a small studio in my home, but not very comfortable. So I very literally got my feet dirty and stuck my toes in the mud. So there was that. And there were a few really beautiful residencies that came out of it for me in that time, which included attending the Earth Body Institute in Berkeley. So leaning into eco-psychology practices. Also participating in Design Science Studio, which was a fellowship program through Buckminster Fuller Institute, and eventually teamed up with UC Irvine. So we got to play with this concept called the Living Systems Collaboratory. So kind of exploring, each person was exploring their artistic practice through the lens of systems theory and natural design. So that was very fun. And then I had the privilege and honor of being welcomed into Bandaloop as their inaugural Updraft Artist in Residence. So I got to like harness up and fly through the trees because that's how they were training at the time as well. So I think those things were super formative for me and really beneficial in getting me into my body in a way that maybe I wouldn't have had access to previously. And also my mind, like what does choreographic notation look like if you're like suspended from a redwood tree versus like a eucalyptus tree, or, you know, if you're like waiting in the middle of the ocean somewhere. So that became very beautiful. And then simultaneously working for Epiphany, and how do we dive into the logistics of producing the 17th annual San Francisco Trolley Dances Festival, which generally will physically tour crowds of, you know, I think across the whole weekend, we're like receiving usually 5,000 people or so, shaking hands with them directly, they're engaging our dancers. And this time it was, how do I, as the manager of this organization, like help us pivot to creating an online festival that's, you know, as seamless as we could get. So now more hats, because we're learning how to like edit video and film it with, you know, new GoPros and all the things. So I would say that COVID gave me space to be more expansive, where previously I felt a little bit trapped and like struggling in the grind. And I'm very appreciative for that.
Appreciative for sharing all of that with us. That's really, oh gosh, so many of those things. I wish I could have gone out and done those. I just rolled around on concrete, but you know, that's a story for another day. Speaking of which, Eric, how has COVID worked for you and for the company and the companies that you keep around you and all of that?
Well, it's a great question. And I appreciate David saying, just sort of acknowledging different levels of privilege. I feel like I'm very privileged, and that I recognize there's a tremendous amount of suffering and confusion and pain around COVID and loss. And I honor that and am saddened by that. And at the same time, have had this experience of it's sort of been the best time of my life, I think, in many ways. And I feel like the biggest thing was I got permission to be an introvert, and didn't realize how much of an introvert I was, because I also love being around people, and I run all these ensembles and I teach all these classes and I'm around people all the time. But I didn't realize how exhausting that is. And so the permission to be at home, to not go out and do things, has just radically changed my life. I was struck that suddenly the big change to me was that we couldn't do performances in the same way that we had been for many, many years. And I was struck by not missing that at all, that I was like so relieved. Not that, I mean, I had wonderful experiences with performance, and it felt really good to not have to do that, and to see that there were other ways of being in dance and performance. An interesting query for me is, there's some ways that I feel like things changed when COVID started, and for me, in many ways, nothing changed, because I've been really sort of investigating the last few decades what I call inclusive performance, inclusive experimental performance, which is we're always working with whoever is here in whatever way we can be here, with whatever the current situation is. And so I'm pretty sure we didn't stop like for a second. Like when the lockdown started, we just like, okay, now we're rehearsing online. Okay, now, and we do that every week. And then at a certain point we could come back in person in the parks, and we did that. And it's this sense, for me, it was this sense of like realizing that there's this thread through my life of, it's really important to me to do what we call rehearsal. I don't know if it's really rehearsing all the time, but to be meeting with a group of people that I love and that I feel connected with on a weekly basis, or some very regular basis, to come together to explore the realm of intuition and mystery and creativity. And it really helps to have, I find, for me and for many of the people I work with, to have some kind of deadline, like a performance that we're heading to. But more and more, I feel like that's just kind of like a little bit of a trick to like get people to show up, and to get me to show up. Because really what's happening is this coming together on a regular basis. And then I guess the other thing I'll share, well, and so a question I have maybe for all of us, we might not get to it tonight, but I feel like in some ways we're at this huge like sea change in our culture around with the pandemic and all the other things that have happened in the past couple of years of what does dance and what is performance going to be. In another sense, I feel like in a sense, it's just the next moment. Like it's always been this immense amount of suffering in the world, always been so much instability. We don't know what's coming. It's always been a question of, artists are pretty much always on the edge, and we're always sort of struggling to figure out how to make it work with whatever is happening. And so I'm just kind of curious of how do we hold it, assuming that there's going to be a lot more things like this pandemic and like with climate change and more pandemics, and this pandemic maybe is not even halfway over, I don't know. And so how do we get to something? I feel like COVID has given us this opportunity to get to something more essential about what we're doing and why we're interested in this weird thing of live art. And for me, it brought me back to the why, and it was about being with people on a regular basis and exploring. And we all might have different whys, but somehow that why, I feel like it's really important to carry us through whatever's coming next, because it's going to keep changing, I think. And I don't think we're ever going back. And that was an illusion if we ever thought anything was the same anyways. So what is the core thread that we follow as movement body artists? It's interesting to me. And I feel like this time has given me a chance to explore that with other people who I'm really interested in.
Eric, can I respond to this? Or Amy, do you mind if I respond?
Yes, go. Yes, please do.
So it's, I'm with you. I hear you, Eric, loudly about what are we doing different? What are we going to start doing differently? Something that also has happened for me during COVID is that it has made me sewn in on the why, as you mentioned, the reason that I do what I do, the reason that I love what I do, not just as an artist or as a mover, but also as a person. So I almost doubled down on the center or the heart of my organization, which is to uplift and bring visibility to Latinx and Hispanic voices. And very clearly intersectionally, make it be visible intersectionally. So to me, it's starting. I'm almost going back to the original ideas of like, why am I going to create a company? Well, for this reason, because I don't see people on stage who look like me. I don't see narratives or concepts that describe my experiences. So I'm revisiting all that, and it's re-energizing what I think I'm going to be doing moving forward and what I'm doing now, which is like, for instance, the Latinx Hispanic Dancers United initiative, both the regional and the national, I launched during COVID. It was already on our agenda, but I launched it during COVID because I thought, actually, this is, even though I was advised not to, because who wants to launch new things during COVID? But I thought this is the perfect time for this, because this is when community is needed, particularly for me, for communities of color, immigrant communities, bilingual communities, international communities. So I thought, no, this is actually probably the best time to really, really do this. And it turned out to be true on multiple levels, not just for the community building aspect, but because a lot of us who are spread out throughout the region and the country, and by us, I mean Latinx and Hispanic dance artists, we have been, it seems like we needed this because the initiative quickly grew much faster than I thought it was going to grow, and to a point where it's like, oh, this is going fast. So, but that is the exciting part, and I'm not sure if others are having that kind of thing, or kind of like growth and resurgence. I don't know what it's going to look like moving forward, because I've been one of the few people who haven't produced anything for online as far as performances. That can very well change, but for right now, I'm concentrating on let me build the community more before I go back to this toil and trouble of like production, deadline, which is what exhausts us, right? And if I do plan on being here for a long time and bringing other people with me, building them up at the same time, I figure I better go easy on myself for the longevity rather than wear myself out.
Thank you for sharing that, David, and for pointing all of that out. I really appreciate that. I'm sure we all really appreciate that. I was having an interesting time with COVID. I feel like I got very in tune with myself and my creativity when I was locked up and alone. Continuing to still work with Eric in a little bit, once a week rehearsals with Raven sometimes, virtually sometimes, just making it work. What I ended up doing was turning a lot of my creativity, my choreography that I do, my teaching, all the things that I do to work in a virtual realm, because I didn't know how it was going to go for so long. And because, again, like Eric pointed out, we don't know how far we are through this pandemic, when life is going to go back to some normal. I'm using air quotes, some normal. But what I ended up doing with my own personal work and choreography was I started moving in towards a video realm. And so, like Jes pointed out, I started wearing all these different hats, getting comfortable with lighting, with movement, with editing, with sound, with all these different things. So over the pandemic, I was able to just get more comfortable with dance in film, dance on camera, dance video projects, whatever you want to call that. And a lot of my work now has kind of moved towards just a video. So for me, my performance specifically with my group and whatever I do on my own is more in a digital realm. And I will host viewings or showings. I will have a showcase like Raven was talking about with Safe House, just for my work. And sometimes I'll be a part of other showcases like ones that Eric has hosted and showcase a video project that I have done. And that's kind of how I'm making performance work with COVID and with myself, feeling fulfilled and everything. But I know that we're also in an evolution of change right now. We're shifting, and dance isn't going to go into, in the near future at least, of you all show up at the door, you pay for your ticket, you go sit cram next to someone else, you watch on stage someone in front of you or some people in front of you, you clap, you mingle, and you go. I don't know when that is going to happen without a mask, right? So close together. So this can kind of just be an open free-for-all as far as anyone responding. It doesn't have to be in a certain order, or you can ask questions back and forth to each other. But where do you guys hope in the future of performance? Two parts of this question. Where's your dream of performance? For example, my dream of performance would be that we would move more towards a digital video realm, just because that's in the sense of where I'm going. I love me a good live performance, and I love the energy from the audience. And I've really fallen in love with what dance on camera, dance in film, dance in video, all of that can do. So one of the questions is, where do you think, like, your dream state of where performance can go? And where do you, more of like a practical, where do you think dance might go? What do I mean by that? I mean, do you think that dance is going to be it's going to be harder to get people to any kind of performance that is live because they're going to be afraid to come out and be amongst people, because they are maybe awkward and shy and not shy, but uneasy with how to interact with the public, whether they have a mask or not? Do you think that we, the public, the audience that will be watching, are over getting in the seat and watching people on stage? Do you think that we're all going to move to performance being outside, for example? Any one of you can respond to either of those two or both of those two, but those are kind of the things that I would like to really hone in and focus on as far as where the future of performance for you and your idea will go or could go. Does anyone have any strong? Yes, Jess?
Yeah, I would love to speak to that. I think that, well, one, I definitely went out and bought the URL Dance Outdoors as soon as this whole thing started. I'm such a fan of, like Eric, you mentioned earlier, ceremony and ritual theater, and how do we create safe containers and comfortable containers for folks to like get intimate, get like grounded together, you know, regardless of what like social proximity or like familiarity. So I'm personally hoping for more of that, outdoor settings. I know, for instance, where I'm at here in the East Bay, like Cal Shakes is an underused venue, but how many other venues are like that, where it's like literally just a beautiful, expansive space that can be activated. I think there is definitely something to us as creatives constantly having one or both feet in that state of liminality. You know, we're dreamers, you know, we're like literally pulling things out of the air and feeding them to our audiences. And so I feel like some combination of that would be super appealing to me. How do we bring media, whether it's, you know, like digital media, how do we bring projections or weave in these elements that we're so used to seeing in a theater environment into these outdoor environments, or recontextualizing an outdoor environment for a smaller audience indoors. That would be fun.
Absolutely, that would be really fun. Yes, Eric, go ahead.
Well, a couple things that both David and Jess have said a lot of things that I want to respond to, and I probably won't get to all of them, but David talking about doubling down on sort of like what I understood as like the mission of your company, to me feels like such an important thing to do over and over and again in our careers. My experience has been in my own career and watching my fellow artists is that we got into this because we love it in some way. And my plan was like, I love dance. I have to organize my life in such a way that I get to dance a lot. That was like my main dream. And so the model that was available was dance company and become a dancer in a dance company or run a dance company. But really what I wanted to do is just have a life that allowed me to be in the studio with people I'm excited about on a regular basis. But I lost sight of that for a long time in what I see as a more capitalist model of like a dance company that's going to be successful and get more and more money and more audiences. And I started sort of being a servant of that vision instead of just coming back to what is the core, like, why did I start this, and come back to that. So I feel like that's really important. And in terms of sort of what form dance could take in the future, I think it would make me really happy if there's like no solid form that we could hold on to, that it just keeps changing, and that everybody has to. I feel like we get so focused in this culture on like developing, and definitely I do, developing something that's going to last, and that this is how I'm always going to do it, and I'm going to build it, and it's going to go on for a long time. But what drew me to modern dance, 20th century modern dance, was this sense that it was always changing and responding to the times. And I'll just say that I moved to the Bay Area in 1993, and in San Francisco and in the East Bay, there was such a rich culture of like very experimental work in storefronts and parking lots and under freeways. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. We can do anything. And people are doing all this stuff. And it was really edgy and rough and dirty and raw. And then something happened in the late 90s. I think maybe I just, I don't know, got complacent, but it seemed like something happened where everything started getting much more about how do we get audiences and how do we build our companies and get them to be established financially. And it seemed like all the flyers started looking the same, and everybody started using the same photographers, and the images started looking the same more. And that was sad to me. But there's been moments where I feel like that underground, more punk rock aesthetic has come out, and that's really exciting. And I feel like that's an aesthetic of, we don't know what the future is going to be. I'm going to try this, and this is what I'm doing now. And then tomorrow I might try something completely different. And there's nothing solid to hold on to, and let's like be in this unknown together. And I hope we can do that ongoing, and it keeps changing and changing and changing. And the last point, sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but I think that question of why, and then what is the appropriate venue or the appropriate form, like, you know, dance outdoors, or maybe not performing online, or yes, performing online or doing dance video, that if we could all be really specific to each moment for ourselves. I sense in the theater and dance world, there's just this default, we go on the proscenium stage, and I think that works for maybe 5% of the things that go up onto stage, but most things I feel like have another venue that, or form, that would suit it better if they could find it, or if they got the support to go into that. And so really not using defaults and going into what's needed in this moment.
I want to jump on this again. Oh, I'm sorry, Raven, did you want to go ahead?
Yes, I would love to add to the conversation here. Yeah, definitely want to piggyback on what folks have already said about, you know, we've discovered so many beautiful things over this pandemic. I mean, we're learning more about how to be on camera and to adapt to different site-specific things. And so, like Eric said, you know, we're coming back to our roots of experimentation, and that's where things are very fresh and very new. I would also like to put out there that, at least for me, the future of dance needs to be trauma informed. You know, we're dealing with the inequities that we've had, and you know, just the overarching concept that we've had out there in the past, that you need to suffer for your art. No, we don't need to suffer for our art. I remember going into a workshop earlier this month, and one of the people leading the workshop dropped us in as if the pandemic had never happened. We were, bam, all of a sudden partnering with people, and it was very jarring, and feelings were coming up for a lot of people, and there wasn't a whole lot of accommodation for what was happening in that space. And it really spoke to me of the need to really be sensitive and be in the moment and be willing to have the hard conversations with each other, and being able to navigate our art from more of a place of introspection and exploring together and navigating the tender places. I think there's a lot of art to be mined from the tender places if you do it in a conscious and loving way. Okay, back to you, David.
Yeah. I was just going to say, David.
Okay, thank you. You know, going back to the question you asked about what do we dream of, and how do we envision moving forward, if that's even a thing. I honestly feel that this is a time for us as a field to investigate how to bring dance back to a place that is not so formalized, not always on the proscenium, not always in an institution, but bring it back to a locality, right? We live our lives site specifically. So wherever we're at, that's where we're at. And that is the experience that we're having. Whatever is around us, we walk around trees, we walk around buildings, we feel energy from people around us. So since our lives are already meant to be that way, it is strange to me when dance becomes so bubbled, I guess. In C Space, the last several home seasons that I've had there, I have purposely gotten rid of rafter seating and that fourth wall. I throw the audience onto the stage with the dancers. Dancers go in front of the audience, around them, whatever, and I just let that be the experience, right?
Yes.
But that is also something we can do on the outside. One thing that I would love to see maybe happen is if we do continue with limitations with theater spaces, which, and don't get me wrong, I still love theater spaces, but if we continue with limitations, maybe having the city work with the theater spaces, or the theater spaces initiate something with the city where they can produce work at a park nearby. And for instance, C Space has a park down the street. Maybe can we take something down there, you know, in the neighborhoods, get in contact with the neighborhood associations. Can we do a show on a 1 block radius? It would also highlight the neighborhood themselves, right? And I think new forms of collaboration can initiate from that. And this idea of reconnecting movement, heritage, culture, ideas, and reconnecting it back to the earth and to the place, to me is super exciting. And I kind of want to see more of that conversation starting to happen. Because kind of like what Tammy wrote in the Q&A question, I myself also don't want to take up another huge project of filmmaking, finding filmmakers, buying the equipment. That's something that does not call my interest. I was like, oh no, I'm trying to calm down, not take on more work. Right. So I feel like this is maybe something we can start doing. Plus, also, honestly, like I said, I had rehearsals in the park across the street from me, and I kept telling the cast, maybe we're just gonna show something here, and we're just gonna say we're gathering to just have some fun, and not publicize necessarily ticket sales, but publicize like, come experience with us.
I would love to add on to that, to what all of you have said, actually, because like my background in dance making definitely comes from a punk rock place. I'm from New York City, and like the most formative years of my life and the most exciting moments in producing works had to do with like first a company called The Danger, which would like lure you onto the Brooklyn Bridge with a parade, like, you know, and take you onto trains and force you to explore the city in new ways, and really hunt down your art. And I do think that there's a bit of that in San Francisco and in, well, the entire Bay Area. But yes, you bring up a great point about it being formalized. I think some of that has to do with, you know, survival. Like there's this strange dance that we're all doing with survival and how do we maintain like an anti-capitalist framework whilst trying to survive. They don't exactly play nice together. That said, there are ways to kind of mitigate that or dance through that, and to even you know, an organization like Epiphany that's been around for years and years, you know, in 2019, we were shooting some of our trolley dances promo for the sides of buses on iPhones. You know, that was before we like really got the courage up to say, okay, we're gonna film like a full movie. We're gonna get a gimbal and all the things. So I think, you know, outside of the task of editing, or you know, outside of the pressure we put on ourselves to like do it correctly and do it in a way that like appeases the capitalist gods that are like doling out the hundreds and thousands of dollars, there is still that like childlike wonder that we can bring to the table. There's still, you know, the renegade performance in the cave, they're still whipping out your iPhone. I mean, even at the beginning of COVID, my wife and I are in our living room filming with a a tripod handle in a paper towel tube in a boot on a table because we couldn't afford, you know, the tools that we needed at that time. And I think it really speaks to the genius that comes out of like the struggling artist mentality. Like we all just kind of need to remember what that feels like. I think that there's so much value in that punk rock attitude. So thanks for bringing that up, Eric.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you for chiming in about that, Jess. And I wanted to read really quickly Tammy's question, just in case no one read it or they want to hear it. As we know, the inequities of dance continue going online, and video also has its inequity in terms of cost, access, capacity. For one, I think you meant I don't have the capacity to put the filmmaker hat on top of everything else. I'd like to hear more about how the panelists see the dance community address those inequities. So David and Jess kind of spoke to those a little bit. I know Eric and Raven have had to really, or chosen, but have had to use film and video to continue with dance for performance and rehearsal as options. And for myself, like I said, I didn't know much about editing and recording, but what I ended up, like kind of what you said, Jess, is that I just had that starving artist mentality and would literally prop my phone up anywhere for the longest time to just try and figure out, okay, it's just going to be one take and this is it. This is what we're going to get. However grainy, however raw and uncut it is, like this is what it is. And from there, it kind of just grew, and it grew from numerous angles, and it grew from me trying to figure out how to edit things. I worked with a couple of videographers, professional videographers, paid them to help me create some of my work on video. And it really, really hurt financially. I was like, okay, this isn't going to work for me. I have to figure out how I can make dance on film, dance on video affordable and something that I can work towards. So Eric, I think you've gotten really, really good at making it work for you, and Raven, you as well. Are there any kind of tips or ideas that you want to speak on or just touch on, or how you've made dance and video and how you've taught yourself maybe? Raven, I think Eric is pointing to Raven.
Okay. Well, almost all of my films were shot on my housemate's cell phone, and my housemate was my videographer. And one of the things you can do is you can get that video on a cell phone, and then there's editing software that you can download for free and play with, and that's kind of how we made it work. Eric, I don't know what it was like for you.
Well, I think Tammy's asking like a huge question that I feel like it has to do with huge systemic issues of inequity that go throughout all of our lives and all aspects of all of our lives. And I'm heartened by the way that in this recent time, more people in the arts community and just more people in general are looking at issues of inequity and diversity and racism and inclusion. And I think it's important to keep coming back to, like, this isn't something that we just like, oh, we'll just do this and then that'll make it better. But that, like, I think we're being called to transform our whole lives and the whole way we interact with each other and with community. And it's a lifetime's work. And that wrestling with inequity is something we're going to be doing our whole lives. But the thing that in particular, what came to me in reading Tammy's question is that I wonder about some way of questioning our values around production and who's like what validates our art. And you know, there's a particular value in many communities that the bigger audiences are better. Getting a bigger grant is better than a smaller grant. You know, like higher production values are better than lower production values. And I just really question all of those, and that to look at valuing performance in a different way. Like I'm thinking a lot about audience. I tend to work in somewhat large ensembles, and more I feel like, you know, if somebody else, an audience member, comes to one of our things, that's great, but we have enough people here witnessing each other, that's plenty, that's enough. And so somehow coming to this like, for me, something about learning to recognize enoughness, that I have such a addiction to more, and that, yes, I want to address inequity, and I also want to spend more time in a different paradigm where my performance that I do for myself when I wake up in the morning and do my morning exercises is enough. And it doesn't have to be that it's leading to something where 500 people are going to see it. Maybe some days 3 people will see it, and that's enough. So challenging that part of our conditioning.
Thanks, Eric. I think that kind of, at least for me, it seemed like it touched on maybe what David had mentioned earlier about, you know, why do you dance, or where is it coming from, and bringing it back to the roots and what works for you. Raven, were you going to say something?
Yes, within Safe House, we're addressing our own systemic racism, and we have hired an EDI consultant to help us work through some of the systems that we've held unconsciously in place. And we're working on our anti-racism statement, and we are and as we are putting feelers out for new artists, we are prioritizing the voices of queer, trans, and POC people, and endeavoring to help co-create a space where people of those intersections and their work can be not only welcomed but celebrated.
I think to that effect, that's, oh, sorry, Eric.
No, I was just going to say, Jess, could you speak on what those juicy words and go into more detail that you left in the chat? Because I was reading really quickly and I was like, wait, Jess has to speak about this. Okay.
Well, so I guess before I lose my place in response to Raven, I love that you're doing that work, and I see that, you know, especially in the shift of funding priorities that we've seen for now, like the last maybe 2 years, or maybe it was a slow grow that I missed out on the early moments of, but there's a lot of emphasis on like bringing historically marginalized communities in, but there's not so much emphasis on the follow-up, the follow-through. Where does that support go after the residencies ended? You know, are they dropped off? Or after the performance has been shown, how do you continue to amplify those voices? So I think that there is a conversation, I mean, we could spend a whole hour just on that alone, is a conversation that needs to happen around, you know, the what's next, not just the equity statement, not just the, you know, here's a couple $1,000, make something gorgeous for our website, you know? So there's that. And then as far as what I've written in the chat is, I think encouraging our communities to be okay with the process of rapid prototyping. It's so challenging. It's something that I'm struggling with right now, but kind of speaking to what Eric mentioned about that sense of enoughness and what is viable. And, you know, the funders are generally, you know, they need something to fund. That money is just going to sit there otherwise, or they'll figure it out. But if there are more artists that are shaping what is out there, then they're going to have to eventually cater to it, in my mind, I hope. I'm green in this sector, so I might be, you know, it might be wishful thinking. But, you know, I think that urging folks to relieve themselves of that sense of perfectionism, like I need to have a very shiny film in order for people to appreciate it, is so important. And how do you remount? How do you reiterate? How do you remix? And also, how are we, you know, engaging communities in a way that, well, I guess more succinctly put, who's telling, what stories are being told and by whom? You know, who's in control of telling the stories? Who is holding the lens over, you know, the Afro-Latinx experience, the queer experience, or are we allowing communities to be self-determining through these efforts?
Thank you so much, Jes, for pointing those out and speaking on those things. David, you had mentioned your, I think, is that what I read in the was that you that wrote that?
Yes, I just posted something, but I know Eric was wanting to say something.
Okay, Eric, you want to respond first?
David, you go ahead and I'll save it. It's yeah.
Are you sure?
maybe a different topic or going a different direction, maybe. But yeah, so David, you were having a similar conversation or something was coming up, the what next?
Yes.
Topic question?
Funnily enough, last night we held a meeting with the Latinx Hispanic Dancers United SF Bay Area artists, and the conversation revolved around the what next. And by that I mean that we're speaking about when moving forward, what do we want? What do we desire? What do we need? What are the non-negotiables that we now are needing from our institutions and our theaters and our studios and folks who do have positions of power within the community, right? So we spoke about C-Space, ODC, Counterpulse, Safe House. I mean, we spoke about all these spaces about and talking about, well, many of them have solidarity statements. So we created a list of all these solidarity statements. How do we keep them accountable in a quantitative way, so that it doesn't become just fluff, it doesn't just become nice words that they can use for a grant, but that it becomes an actionable item. And as Jes mentioned, one of the ways that we decided to use this is to co-sign our names to this list of needs and wants and changes. And then I'm going to say this out loud. The next step for us is now to set up a meeting with the directors and the owners of these organizations, especially theater renters, studio renters, and have them hear us out and have an open dialogue where they're hearing from the actual community. Because a lot of times what organizations do is they look into themselves to create these changes or to try to change things. But when you're working with the people you already work with daily, you're not going to bring about what the community actually needs. You might hit on a couple of things here and there, but you're not actually inviting the community into that space to really say what they need to say. So this is a way that we are working now to make to bring this up to the forefront in a very real fashion, because I'm looking for actionable items.
I think the actionable items are key. Yes, Eric, before I go off on a tangent, please speak.
Well, I'll do my own tangent, but Jes's question and then David about what's next made me think about, I listened to this talk this morning that was really powerful. One of my favorite teachers right now is a man named Bayo Akomolafe, who's just amazing Nigerian philosopher, teacher. And he was having a discussion with Resmaa Menakem, who I also really love. And the two of them were talking about the future of Blackness. And it was a very provocative discussion. But one of the things that Bayo said that really landed well with me was saying just how important it is to sort of recenter, and there's a lot of talk about recentering the narrative and recentering who are the voices. But he said, but it's really important. There's also, that's problematic because there's also a way that we recenter things into whiteness and white supremacy. And so the example he gave, just sort of jokingly, was like, my grandmother's voice, I don't want to recenter her onto the Titanic. Like, I want her, you know, it's that there's something about this time that, you know, with all this, the accountability and reckoning with racism in this country and in this world, that's really important. And there's this, I feel like there's also this like whiteness, white supremacy culture is sort of co-opting a lot of that. And like, okay, then we all have to do is statements. We have to say these certain statements and say the right thing and all those things. There's many good things happening there, but I'm wondering about, there's some kind of dismantling that I feel like also we need to acknowledge and let happen. And so I think Tammy's question was really great about how is the dance community going to address inequities? And my other answer is like, I'm wondering if the dance community needs to like, is a skin of a snake that needs to shed. And the new snake that's coming through is something that we have to, that's raw and alive, and we have to really stay present with it. And there aren't these easy answers, but there's this skin being shed, and can we let that be shed and then bring what we learned into what's next? But it's not going to be something that we can just tie down with concepts. How's that for a tangent?
That's a really good tangent. And I'm just like envisioning that. I love the idea. I mean, I very clearly see the idea of the snakes shedding its skin. I think that is a really very clear picture of what I think dance, like what dance looks like right now, that's how I feel, at least as well. The snake needing to shed that skin and figuring out what it looks like underneath that layer, that first layer. Or maybe we're at the second or third layer at this point. So I want to make sure that we can leave time to ask each other, and we can kind of go back and forth to what we've already addressed or touched on. But is there something that you would want to ask one of the other panelists, or each other, or anyone else in the audience that is watching that has any questions for us to kind of follow up and go into more detail as far as anything that we've touched on? We could talk day and night about our experience individually and collectively with everything that we've just touched on, with COVID, with the future of performance, with the inequities within dance, with the accessibility. We could spend whole long conversations on each one of those topics. So to kind of throw it all and meld like a melding pot. That's the one I'm trying to use. To put it all together is kind of hard to get through all of those things. So I want to just give a moment to go back to or spend more time on anything that we first started talking about. Yes, Eric. Well, I can't see David on my phone, but yes, I see Eric's hand.
A question that I have for the other panelists, I'm curious to hear, and I feel like some have talked about this a little bit, but just where your kind of personal practice, either with dance or just movement, body, ritual, whatever is like, we've been talking in kind of a public facing way or like professional work, career, but I'm curious where each of you are at around just sort of your personal practice and what you're working on, what's your edges around personal practice right now, and if that speaks to you.
I'm gonna just jump in. It's funny because so I work right now. I'm with the company, with the dancers. Obviously, I let them create and choreograph a lot of the work. And the reason I think that is important is it's agency, it's ownership of the material, and it's also the way their bodies move. Their body is not my body. And I'm a firm believer that I cannot and will not force them to try to do something that I think I can do. And this is, and that comes from all those forced classes that I was in, particularly thinking of things like ballet, that I was like, my brown body's not doing that. I just wasn't built that way or culturally brought up that way, so it's not going to do that, and getting reprimanded for it, right? So anyhow, and when creating, to me, it's very important to ask the dancers, where does this concept or this idea live in your body? And then how does it manifest? How do you expunge it? How do you bring it out? How do you let it, how do you work through healing to talk about these issues or these concepts? How do you use it as medicine for yourself, right? So that to me is very exciting. So that's one aspect. The other part is a personal process that I'm working in right now, which is this idea of, we've used the word shedding recently, this idea of shedding and decolonizing my own practice. And by this, I mean, again, it's a very real thing where I am purposely fighting so like I said, I started late. And then because I started late, I did a lot of catching up. And in trying to catch up, I started to just adopt all these things and forms and studio techniques and whatnot that I thought I needed to be in order to be a professional dancer, right? Almost to the point where I started reaffirming that and becoming my own gatekeeper and becoming my own, like, policing my own body. Like, you have to move like this, you have to look like this. And you alluded to this, Eric, that dance started to look the same. And I started to question also the lineage of, I was trained in modern and Cunningham and Graham, and I started to question that lineage. Like, why is this so elevated? And yet the Mexican zapateado that I learned since I was a little kid is not, when it's a real form. There's real practice. It's cultural. It's not in the studio. You do it when you're at dances and at events. You're doing it in the backyards. You're doing it on the streets. But it has the same, to me now, it has the same value. So I am going back to a place where I'm trying to recall through using muscle memory and emotional recall. What did my body look like and how did it move prior to all this other conditioning that came into my life much, much later? So this is a slow moving process for me, but it's an exciting process. It's a growing journey to go back, because what I hope to eventually get to is to a place where I'm not feeling the pressure to look professional, but in fact, just moving the way I feels most natural to me. And I can use it how I want. If I choose to incorporate it into my work, then yes, I will put it into my work, and I can combine it with my modern technique or my contemporary technique, but that's up to me. But no longer feeling the pressures of up high to do it the way I thought I needed to do it, particularly within the concert dance field. Does that make sense? So I have two different practices going on. Eventually, I feel like I'm going to marry the two with the dancers. I think eventually, probably not this season, but moving forward, I'm going to start to figure out, well, how do I incorporate the same idea of decolonizing that practice to bring into the work creation?
That does make sense. And thank you for touching on all of those things, especially that idea of marrying those two together. I feel like I'm similar. I have two things that I'm kind of focusing on in my dance practice too, and trying to figure out how they work together as one, or maybe they stay in two different directions. But I would really love to kind of get those two together. Raven or Jes, did you want to talk about what you're doing with your practice now? The question that Eric had posed. Either one of you?
Sure thing.
Yeah.
So for me, also feeling very deeply into this process of decolonization, I think that there is something, well, I've spoken about the land work that I'm doing, working site specifically, but for me, that has a lot to do with like my grandmother's like herbal remedies, like our relationship to maybe it's like the cultural anthropology that is related to the plants and the soil and the waters. So there's been a lot of field study, a lot of field research, taking dancers like to crazy places, going to like, volcanic area in Maui and looking at, what has come out of such destruction and how fertile the soil is and how do our feet feel on that ground versus somewhere else, and what are we surrounded by, and why are there so many species that are endemic to that area? But that said, why are the folk dances that are native to those places so similar? The folk dances you might see in a volcanic area of Hawaii, very similar to the places the dances you might see in the areas of Australia, where there's like a rich indigenous culture there. And just really trying to connect the dots through these various types of movement, these various vocabularies, in hopes of finding my own authentic movement vocabulary. There's been a lot of journaling. I think there's been a lot of somatic practice and like becoming a floor person. Truly, I got a great rug, splurged on the rug, became a floor person, and just practiced like feeling into techniques that were very codified, I think, for me in training. Like, you're taught a specific way to approach Feldenkrais or, any of these other modalities. But what does it mean to follow your nose and kind of play through that? So that's become very potent for me. I think also that aspect of film, as I'm like deconstructing my previously learned movement vocabularies, the film has been so critical because one, I'm now able to kind of control the gaze, control the angle, play with depth, play with shadow in ways that, maybe I would never show an audience, but just that practice of leaning into looking at myself through this lens that I've not offered opportunity to do so before is just so special. And the other thing with film is manipulating it and playing with it backwards. And so what is the quality of movement like, that really, oh, my record player is missing next to me, but flipping a record over and like playing it backwards, and what happens to our sense of composition or our sense of timing has been, I guess I'm saying, a lot of play has emerged in this time. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Raven, sorry to only give you a little bit, but really quickly, your practices and what's been working for you, because we do have to wrap up in a minute or two. What's been going on for you?
Well, since my illness, I've had to kind of rebuild from the ground up, and finding that a lot of the traditional stuff, like, like David was talking about, the ballet, Cunningham and such, I decided to stop shoulding on my body. And explore, and like Jes was saying, exploring somatic practices, but investigating how they apply to my own body, because there's some like Klein technique where the feet are so close together. But what happens when you separate the feet? What happens when you make room for anatomy that may not have room? And decolonizing practice in terms of weight and body size, and all of that. And I've become a floor person as well. Jes, I can really relate to that. That was one of the ways I was able to start healing. I was like, I had very deep body aches when I had COVID, and one of the things that I did was lie down on the floor and just explore gravity. What does it feel like to move from my bones? What does it feel like to move from my muscles? What about from my skin? And, even more radically, I started exploring this with Eric, but I've really started getting into it on my own. What does it mean to move from my fat? And I mean, that's a thing that has just been such a taboo in dance circles for so long. And we're coming out of these lockdowns and these times of isolation, some of us with different bodies that we went into with. And the idea that we would have to punish ourselves to get back to that, why can't we find a new way to be at peace with our body? And why can't we make to make it from that space? David just asked, what does it feel like from my cultural center? Well, I'm very aware of my own whiteness and all of that. And I think about, some of the practices that I've employed in the past that, have been borrowed from brown people. I practiced yoga for a long time, and, been trying to reinvestigate, okay, what does that mean? What does it mean for me, a white person, to be using these practices? So I've also been investigating some of my Northern European heritage, and for a dance film recently, we were recreating and reimagining ourselves as monsters, and I actually based one of my characters off of a monster from my culture. And brought that in. And so it's I've been trying to figure out, what it means to move in this Northern European body, what it means to move in this fat body, what it means to move in this queer and trans body. And I don't have all the answers yet. I don't expect to anytime soon, but I'm going to follow the questions for as long as I can.
Yes. And I think that that's a really great way to segue and transition towards possibly another conversation about this, the why and the what's next. I think that we have just literally dipped one pinky toe in to this pool of this conversation that we could have with each other and with other community members about dance, performance, where it's going, what's next. And I think that what I would really feel very full inside is if we could find ways, and I know that this is crazy, but if we could find ways each other to blend together and work together, because some of these ideas seem to kind of overlap in some kind of ways. Why are we dancing? What are you trying to say? Because it's healing, because of this and that. And so much of what I've experienced through dance my whole life, 27, 28 years of studying dance and performing dance and teaching dance and all of those things, is that everyone's on their own separately. There's a company, there's a solo artist, there's a this, there's a that. And I would love to see us work together to create something and see what that looks like. Whether it is a company that is more into and educated in videography, working with a company that's maybe not, whether it's a company that's doing more cultural work and one that's doing different kind of work. I would love us to kind of overlap those and working together, because I feel like, especially working with Eric and with Raven and all of our mixed communities that we kind of blend in and out of together, and projects that we blend in and out of, the most fulfilling that I feel when I'm doing dancing is when we're working together, and there's not just one message, one goal, no matter how deep and powerful and necessary it is that when we are working together and all using what we need to express and share with the community, with the world, that's when I feel the most full. And that is just my own opinion. But I would love to just thank Jordan and Z Space for allowing us to have this conversation and to start this. I would, again, love to have more time to talk. And I would just, show my gratitude to each and every one of you for sharing and speaking and holding space for the necessary things that I think dance community and we need to have. So thank you very much, each and every one of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Jordan, if you would like to take over, back to you.
Thank you so much for all of your wonderful, beautiful thoughts this evening. I know we're a little bit over time, but I do want to give everybody one more opportunity to promote an upcoming project that they have before I close this out. So let's start with Jes.
Cool. Let's see. I am working on an event called Hollow and Groove, which is coming out on October 20th, where we will participate in some storytelling adventuring, and we're guiding our audience through Mount Tam in order to experience dance and chat and play around the relationships between the watershed, the salmon, and the redwood trees in that area. So come play with us. I'll put the link in the chat. How about that?
It looks like I'm next. I have a number of different ensembles that I work with. We're working on a piece called Wandering in the Wilderness, and it will premiere on April 8th, 2061. So in 39 years. And so there'll be other things along the way, but you can go to I'll put the website for the piece in the chat. There's lots of showings along the way.
Looks like I'm next. This weekend for one day only, we have a touring group, Modern Garage Movement, that is coming to Safe House from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. They're going to be leading a workshop. It's $25. No one turned away for lack of funds. Taking you into their process for creating work. People who attend the workshop also have an opportunity to perform in the 5 p.m. performance. I'll be showing my new work called Surfacing, and MGM will be premiering their performance called God Knows Where. And tickets are on sale right now. I just dropped the link into the chat. If you want to come for just the performance, it's $10. Again, no one turned away for lack of funds. And that's it.
All right, so coming up soon, I don't have any performances, but I do have an event, another online event. It's an anti-racism series called Dancecuentos that I'm doing with co-facilitators Carla Quintero and Mario Espinosa with international Latinx, Hispanic, and Indigenous artists. And we have 5 guests for that series that we're going to be discussing too. And we're really just going to be listening to what makes who they are and what makes them the people that they become with their artistry. So that's coming up in September. So keep an eye out. That is through the HMD Hope More Dance Anti-Racism series. So keep an eye out for that. I will be publicizing. And then of course, I do have a home season. Hopefully it'll still be coming through in January at C-Space. And so we'll be doing 2 weeks there. And this is a piece called The Tip of My Tongue. And it's a piece about how languages can be used to build community or to attack community. And I have a very cool cast who are all bilingual or multilingual. And it also includes guest choreography by Antoine Hunter, who will be representing the ASL community in relationship to language and communication. So keep an eye out for that as well. Either you can find out more on, I'll put my website on here through the website or through C-Space in relationship to that program. Oh, and of course, Latinx Hispanic United is alive. So if you want to join, send me a message. You can find me on Instagram. In fact, I'll put my personal email here and you can email me directly if you're interested. And then we have Latin extensions applications going out later in the fall for the next cohort, which will start in 2022.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so my turn. I'm working on a dance film. It's a 4-part dance film about the evolution of empowering women. And we are focusing on different aspects of time. So there's the beginning of time. There is an outside space that is going to be channeling the fire elements. There's going to be a section that's going to be channeling the wind elements and the water elements. And I am building and growing with ensemble members each time we rehearse. I actually am running late to my rehearsal right now, but we practice with choreography that we use and mostly that I create, but we also contribute together. We use journaling and journal entry to talk about how we feel about empowering and uplifting each other and other women. And that is what I'm working on now. I have part 1 is already out and I will drop the link in a moment, and I'm rehearsing for part 2. So wish me luck on that.
Thank you all again for participating in this conversation. I want to also give a special thank you to our ASL interpreters for keeping up with us today. You are so greatly appreciated, Pilar, and I just want to say you're both fantastic. So the next Z-Space Civic conversation will be in October. The topic will be announced probably a week before then, and we hope you join us then. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye, thank you.